Chapter 1. The Ultimatum. The rain was coming down in cold sheets as Madelyn Grace Walker stood trembling at the threshold of her parents' front porch in Springfield, Missouri. The storm outside wasn't nearly as violent as the one that had erupted inside the house just 10 minutes earlier. Her father's voice still echoed in her ears, sharp, furious, final. "You've embarrassed this family for the last time. Get out." Madelyn clutched her coat tighter around her, the fabric damp from where the tears had soaked through. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from disbelief, from heartbreak, from a kind of loss she hadn't expected to feel, not so soon, not like this. She was 19 and pregnant, and now homeless. Her mother hadn't said a word. She had just stood beside her husband, arms crossed, lips pursed in a tight line, eyes betraying nothing. No love, no pain, no protest, just silence. That, somehow, had hurt even more than the shouting. Madelyn remembered the moment she broke the news. It wasn't planned. She had come home from her evening shift at the local grocery store, her stomach already queasy from morning sickness that stretched far beyond the morning. She had sat at the dinner table, fingers nervously tracing circles around her water glass. "Mom, Dad," she had said, "I need to tell you something." What came next shattered the image of the family she once thought she had. The confession of her pregnancy had not been met with questions or concern, but with a look of repulsion from her father, followed by a sermon on shame, sin, and disappointment. There was no room for nuance, no room for understanding. Only a verdict, swift and merciless. "You're not our daughter anymore." Now, standing in the downpour, Madelyn realized how little she had prepared for this. She had nowhere to go. No suitcase. No money. Just a backpack with a few essentials she had grabbed before the front door slammed behind her. Her hands instinctively moved to her belly. The baby was just a few months along, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to her, it was already everything. A heartbeat. A reason. A fragile flicker of hope. She turned away from the porch, stepping into the rain. Her shoes soaked instantly, and her jeans clung to her legs. Each step away from the house felt like another layer of her identity peeling off. Daughter, student, good girl, gone. Gone. She found refuge at a 24-hour diner just off the highway. The waitress, noticing her wet clothes and swollen eyes, offered her a free cup of coffee. Madelyn didn't drink it. The baby, but the warmth of the ceramic mug in her hands was something like comfort. She sat there until the diner's neon sign buzzed and flickered with the breaking dawn. She hadn't slept. How could she? Her mind was a carousel of worry. Where will I sleep tonight? What will I do tomorrow? How will I raise this child? She scribbled on a napkin names of shelters she remembered seeing on a flyer at school. She couldn't go back to her apartment. She had been living at home to save money. The baby's father? Gone without a word weeks ago. Blocked her number. Disappeared like he had never existed. Madelyn was alone. But she wasn't empty. As the sky lightened outside and the early trucks rolled onto the road, she felt the baby stir inside her for the first time. It wasn't a kick, just a soft flutter. Barely there. But enough. It was enough. She pressed her palm against her stomach and whispered, "It's just you and me now. And I swear to you, I'll never leave you." That morning, Madelyn made her first call to a women's shelter in Tacoma, Washington, nearly 2,000 miles away. She had no ties there, no past, no judgment. Just a city where she could disappear and start over. She bought a one-way bus ticket with the little money she had left from her last paycheck. The journey would take 3 days. 3 days of silence, of doubt, of sorrow, but also 3 days of courage. And when that old Greyhound bus pulled out of the station, Madelyn Grace Walker wasn't the same girl who had stood trembling on her parents' porch. She was a mother now. and she was going to fight for something better. Chapter 2: A City of Second Chances. The Greyhound bus hummed steadily beneath her as it rolled past unfamiliar towns and long stretches of lonely road. Madelyn sat by the window, her backpack tucked tightly beside her, one hand resting protectively on her lower abdomen. She hadn't eaten much in 2 days, just a few crackers from a gas station and water refills at every stop. But her determination was full, achingly full. Every time her head began to drift into sleep, the same memory pulled her back, her father's finger pointing toward the door. Her mother's turned back. The way no one said, "We'll figure this out." They hadn't tried. So now she had to. It was nearly dusk on the third day when the bus finally wheezed into Tacoma, Washington. The city smelled of rain and salt from the nearby bay. The air was colder than Springfield. New. Sharp. Alive. Madelyn stepped onto the cracked sidewalk and blinked at the skyline. She had never been to the Pacific Northwest. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone and opened the last email from Harmony House Women's Shelter. "We have a bed available for a maximum of 4 weeks. Intake hours end at 9 p.m. Bring ID if you have one. We'll do our best to help." The shelter wasn't far. Just a 20-minute walk. She moved quickly, her backpack heavy but comforting in its weight. As she reached the red brick building with a faded sign, a lump rose in her throat. This wasn't where she thought life would take her. But for now, it was the only place that would take her at all. A kind-eyed woman named Linda met her at the door. She looked to be in her 50s, with curly gray hair and a voice that reminded Madelyn of bedtime stories. Linda asked a few questions: how far along she was, any medical conditions, emergency contacts. Madelyn answered everything truthfully, except for one question: "Do you have any family to call for support?" She just shook her head. Linda didn't press. That night, Madelyn curled up on a twin-sized mattress in a room with 3 other women. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach, but the blanket was soft and warm. One of the other women, a single mother named Rosa, smiled gently at her before turning off her reading light. In the darkness, Madelyn let out the sob she had been holding in since Missouri. It came out in gasps. Quiet ones. She didn't want to wake anyone. But once it started, she couldn't stop. It wasn't just sadness, it was everything. Anger, abandonment, fear, and beneath it all, a thin thread of hope that somehow still held. She fell asleep with her hands clasped around her belly, murmuring to the life inside her like a prayer. The next morning began with oatmeal, a group check-in, and paperwork. The shelter staff helped her apply for Medicaid and prenatal care. They also handed her a flyer for part-time cleaning jobs. Madelyn took every form, every instruction, with quiet determination. Her pride had long since peeled away like old wallpaper. There was only one thing left: the will to keep going. She spent her afternoons walking the streets, asking cafes, laundromats, and grocery stores if they needed help. After 3 days, she landed a part-time job at Maple Bean Cafe, cleaning tables and bathrooms during the late shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid $11.75 an hour. Enough to buy prenatal vitamins and a box of baby clothes from a second-hand store. Linda pulled her aside one evening and said, "You're stronger than you think. I've seen girls break under less." Madelyn didn't feel strong, but she smiled and said, "Thank you." Weeks passed. Her belly grew. Her feet ached. Her back hurt. But she kept moving. She moved out of the shelter into a shared studio apartment with Rosa and her toddler. She bought her first second-hand crib. She made peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and learned to fall asleep despite traffic noise outside her window. One day, standing in the checkout line of a discount store, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. A tired voice spoke on the other end. Familiar. Weathered. "Madelyn, It's Mom. Her heart stopped. I know you don't owe us anything, but your father's had a stroke. He's not doing well. A pause. I thought you should know. The line went quiet. Madelyn stared at the display of chewing gum and tabloids in front of her. Her baby kicked. She whispered into the phone, "Thanks for letting me know." Then she hung up. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just walked home in silence, cradling her growing stomach and wondering what it meant that she didn't feel anything at all. Chapter 3. The Stillness Between Breaths. The apartment was quiet when Madelyn returned. Rosa had taken her daughter to the community library's story hour, leaving the space unusually still. The silence wrapped around Madelyn like a cold fog, dense, uninviting, and heavy with memory. She placed the groceries on the counter, then sat down slowly on the edge of the mattress she and Rosa shared on alternating nights. Her hands rested on her belly, now round and full, a visible testament to the life she was building quietly. Stubbornly, without anyone's blessing. The phone call echoed in her mind, as if her mother's voice had embedded itself in the walls. Your father's had a stroke. Just like that. No build-up. No apology. No acknowledgement of the 8 years they had spent pretending she didn't exist. Madelyn exhaled slowly. She couldn't tell if she was angry or numb. Or both. Maybe the two had blended into something unrecognizable, something dull and distant, like a scar that had healed wrong. She hadn't heard from either of them since the night they'd cast her out. Not a card. Not a call. Not even a stray email. The fact that her mother had somehow found her number now felt surreal. Tacoma had become her new truth. Her world. Her son's world. She had no space for ghosts from Springfield. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after Rosa returned, they sat in silence over microwave mac and cheese. Rosa finally broke the quiet. You look like someone just slapped you through the phone, she said, gently. Madelyn gave a dry smile. That's not far from the truth. She told Rosa everything. The pregnancy. The night she was kicked out. The years without a word. And now this. Rosa didn't flinch. She simply nodded, understanding etched in her tired eyes. I haven't talked to my dad in years, Rosa said. But if he were dying, I'd still want to look him in the eyes. Just once. So I know I'm free. Madelyn looked down. Free? Yeah, Rosa said. Forgiveness ain't for them. It's for you. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You do it so you can breathe again. Madelyn thought about that long after Rosa fell asleep. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror. She looked different now than the girl who had once been pushed off her own porch. There were faint circles under her eyes. A fine scar on her knuckle from scrubbing too many kitchen tiles. Her belly, now nearly full term, stretched her old cotton dress. But her eyes were clearer than they had ever been. No more waiting for approval. No more pretending the pain didn't shape her. And yet, there was still a child inside her. And that child had no grandparents. No roots. Just her. Maybe it was time to close that chapter, not with fire, not with fury, but with finality. She called her mother that evening. Hello. The voice on the other end answered quickly, as if she'd been staring at the phone all day. It's me, Madelyn said softly. I didn't know if you'd call, Deborah said. Her voice cracked like old wood. I don't know why I did, Madelyn replied. A long pause followed. Madelyn could hear faint movement in the background. Oxygen machines? Monitors? I wasn't a good mother, her mom said suddenly. The confession hit like a cold splash. I let your father turn you away. I told myself I was being obedient. But the truth is, I was afraid. Madelyn didn't answer right away. She didn't want to let those words in. Not yet. How is he? She asked instead. He can't talk much. One side's paralyzed. But he looks for you every time the door opens. He doesn't say it, but I know. Madelyn swallowed. I'm due in 3 weeks. a choked breath on the other end. I didn't know, Deborah whispered. Of course not, Madelyn said, gently but with a sting. No one asked. There was nothing more to say. But still, neither of them hung up. I'll come, Madelyn said at last. Just for a few days. And then she added, like a steel thread weaving through soft cloth, not for him. Not for you. For me. And for my son. Her mother didn't protest. She just whispered, "Thank you," before the line went quiet. That night, Madelyn packed her small suitcase. Clothes for herself. Tiny onesies for Noah. A picture book. Diapers. And a single framed photo of herself at 16, smiling between her parents before everything shattered. She didn't pack anger. She packed silence. Memory. And something new she hadn't named yet. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was freedom. Chapter 4. The House with No Welcome Mat. The wheels of the bus hissed against the pavement as it pulled into Springfield's modest central station. Madelyn stepped off slowly, Noah's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. He clutched a stuffed bear, worn at the edges from nights spent curled against his chest. The boy looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes. "Is this Grandma and Grandpa's house?" he asked, voice soft with curiosity and the innocence of a child who had never been taught bitterness. Madelyn nodded slowly, a lump in her throat. Not yet. But soon. The taxi ride from the station to her childhood neighborhood felt like riding backward in time. The same cracked sidewalks, the same mailbox shaped like a red barn. Even the overgrown hedge in front of the Jenkins yard hadn't changed. But her father's house, her old house, felt smaller now, grayer, weighed down by years and silence. There was no welcome mat at the door anymore, just cold concrete. Madelyn lifted her hand and knocked. For a long time, there was nothing. Then the sound of a lock turning. A slow creak. Deborah stood in the doorway. Older, thinner, a light tremble in her hand. She wore a faded cardigan and looked like she hadn't slept well in months. Madelyn met her eyes. No words passed between them. Then Noah peeked out from behind his mother and said brightly, "Hi." Deborah flinched, startled, then smiled, unsure, like her face had forgotten how. "Hello there," she said, voice cracking. "You must be Noah." Madelyn gave her a slow nod. "He's 7, she said quietly. Deborah opened the door wider. "Come in." The inside of the house smelled faintly of old books, disinfectant, and something deeper, something like waiting. The furniture hadn't changed. The same brown sofa. The same picture frames on the mantel. Only now, there was a wheelchair near the corner, beside the fireplace. Samuel Walker sat in it. His once commanding posture was slumped. One side of his face drooped slightly. His left hand rested motionless on the armrest. But his eyes followed her with startling clarity. Madelyn stepped forward cautiously, holding Noah close. Her father looked at her as if trying to speak through his gaze. There was no fire in his eyes this time. No judgment. Just a worn-out grief. She wasn't sure whether it was for himself or for her. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. She was surprised. Noah looked at the man in the wheelchair and whispered, "That's Grandpa?" Madelyn hesitated, then knelt beside her son. "Yes, baby, that's Grandpa." Noah smiled shyly and waved. Samuel blinked hard, his lips twitching, as though trying to form a word. Nothing came, but a single tear rolled down his cheek. Madelyn looked away. Later that evening, after she put Noah to bed in her old room, now dusty, the posters long taken down, she sat at the kitchen table with her mother. 2 cups of tea between them. Silence thicker than the steam rising from the mugs. Deborah reached into a drawer and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "I kept this," she said, sliding it across the table. Madelyn slowly unwrapped it. It was a tiny crocheted hat. Pink and white. From a time when she had thought she was having a girl. before the sonogram, before the heartbreak. She stared at it for a long time. I found it in the laundry after you left, Deborah said. I thought about mailing it, but I didn't know how to write that letter. Madelyn looked up, her voice low and even. Why didn't you stop him that night? Deborah didn't pretend not to know what she meant. She didn't deflect. She just looked away. I thought if I stood by you, he'd turn on me. And I was a coward. There it was. Not an excuse. Not justification. Just the truth. Small and raw. Madelyn's hands trembled slightly as she folded the hat back into the tissue paper. I used to dream about this conversation, she whispered. You begging me to forgive you. Me walking away, stronger for it. Deborah's eyes welled up. And now? Madelyn looked at the cup in front of her. I'm too tired for revenge. And too full of love for Noah to carry hatred around anymore. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Madelyn walked into the living room. Her father was still awake, staring at the ceiling, the TV on mute. She sat beside him. You hurt me, she said quietly. You left me in the storm. Samuel turned his head slowly. There was something fragile in his expression. Not shame, not sorrow, just age. Just the weight of being human and wrong and too proud to admit it until it was too late. I'm not here because you deserve it, she said, tears glistening now. I'm here because I do. She placed Noah's drawing on his lap, a picture of a house with a stick figure family holding hands. It had 4 people. This is who he thinks we are. Samuel blinked. A small grunt escaped him, half a sob, half a breath. Madelyn touched his hand, the good one. And for the first time in years, her heart didn't feel like it was carrying a boulder. It just felt heavy, but manageable. Chapter 5, The Price of Returning. The sun poured softly through the curtains the next morning, brushing golden streaks across the faded wallpaper in the living room. Madelyn had hardly slept, yet her body moved with surprising calm. There was no longer the chaotic uncertainty of those early days in Tacoma. Here, there was only routine, even if it was not hers to begin with. She rose early, careful not to wake Noah, and padded quietly to the kitchen. Her mother was already there, setting out toast and medication. They didn't speak much, just exchanged nods and glances as if trying not to crack the silence too soon. When the wheelchair creaked behind them, Madelyn turned and was surprised to see her father already there, his good hand resting on the wheel. His head tilted toward the window where Noah was now playing with a small toy truck on the front steps. It was an image of normalcy, of a grandson who didn't know what had happened, or perhaps didn't care. Because to Noah, this was all a beginning, not a return. Would you like some tea, Dad? She asked. Samuel blinked slowly, then nodded. Madelyn poured the hot water, her hands steady, as if they'd been doing this for years. She added honey, the way he used to prefer it, and brought it over. He took it in his one working hand, trembled slightly, but managed a small sip. Then he looked at her and tapped his chest twice. She didn't understand at first. Then he mouthed something. Sorry. Her chest tightened. Not because she had waited years to hear it, but because he finally said it when words no longer held power, only weight. The days blurred together after that. Madelyn stayed longer than she had planned. She started learning her father's medication schedule. She helped her mother prepare meals, keep track of hospital appointments, even replace light bulbs around the house. She changed bedsheets. She watched Noah run down the same hallway she had once cried through. It was not forgiveness that kept her there. It was something deeper, more complicated. Duty mixed with mercy. Obligation stitched together with strands of weary compassion. One afternoon, while her father slept, Deborah sat down beside Madelyn on the porch. I know you could have left, her mother said. No one would have blamed you. Madelyn stared out at the street, watching a squirrel dart across the sidewalk. I almost did, she admitted. But Noah, He sees this house and thinks it's part of who he is. I want him to remember this place not as where I was abandoned, but as where something was repaired. Deborah wiped at her eyes with a trembling hand. You're kinder than I was at your age. Madelyn smiled faintly. I wasn't always. A week later, a nurse from the hospice agency came by. After a long conversation, she pulled Madelyn aside. He doesn't have much time, she said softly. Weeks, not months. Maybe less. Madelyn only nodded. That night, she let Noah sit on his grandfather's lap. Samuel was weak, his breath shallow. But he smiled, truly smiled, when the little boy placed a drawing into his lap. It was a picture of the four of them again. This time, though, the stick figures had names. Mommy. Me. Grandma. Grandpa. Madelyn looked at it, then looked at her son. Noah, she said, voice low, do you want to say something to Grandpa? Noah thought for a moment. Then he leaned forward and whispered, I love you, Grandpa. Samuel didn't cry, but his hand closed gently over Noah's, and Madelyn, sitting in the corner of the room, felt something begin to close. Not a wound, not a chapter, but a space between what was broken and what had tried to heal. Chapter 6. Breathing Room. The smell of antiseptic had become part of the house now. It clung to the sheets, seeped into the curtains, and settled in the cracks of the hardwood floors. Even the sunshine filtering through the windows felt quieter, as if the light, too, had learned to tiptoe around the fragile silence of the dying. Samuel no longer left the bed. Each morning, Madelyn rose before Noah and helped her mother adjust the pillows, measure blood pressure, and spoon out oatmeal that went uneaten. The man who had once spoken with thunder now communicated in slow blinks and weak nods. Some days, he didn't even open his eyes. The hospice nurse came every other evening. She was kind, efficient, unafraid of silence. I know this is heavy, she told Madelyn one night while checking Samuel's vitals. But it's also holy. Most people don't get a second chance to sit this close to truth. Madelyn wasn't sure she believed in holiness, but she did feel something shift. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even forgiveness, not yet. It was stillness. A strange, heavy stillness that came with watching life unravel, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but the person beneath it all. Noah adjusted quickly to their temporary home. Children were like that. Flexible, curious, resilient in the ways adults forgot how to be. He built Lego towers in the hallway and read picture books aloud to his grandfather's unmoving form. He didn't understand the weight of dying, but he understood that people needed company. And he was never short of that. Madelyn often watched him from the kitchen doorway and wondered what it must be like to have no memory of betrayal. No memory of doors slammed in rage, of silence used as a weapon. Just now, just presence. Deborah was trying. Madelyn saw it in the small things, the way her mother quietly folded her laundry, or left warm meals on the table before disappearing into the garden. She didn't apologize again, not with words, but she lingered now, present in a way she never had been when Madelyn was young. One evening, while they were peeling potatoes, Deborah finally asked the question she had been holding back. Did you ever hate me? Madelyn didn't look up. I thought I did, she said. For a long time. Deborah nodded slowly. Her hands kept working, but now Madelyn continued, I just feel sad. For both of us. For what we lost because we didn't know how to hold each other through disappointment. Deborah's eyes shimmered, but she didn't speak again. They finished the potatoes in silence. That night, Madelyn found herself in her childhood bedroom again. It looked almost the same, only now it was layered with the dust of years unlived. Old posters still curled at the edges. Her senior year sweatshirt hung behind the door like a ghost waiting to be worn again. She lay beside Noah, who had fallen asleep mid-sentence, one hand curled around her thumb. His breathing was soft and even. She turned to look at the ceiling. This house once suffocated her. Every hallway had echoed with judgment. Every picture frame reminded her of the daughter she failed to be. But now it was just a house. And she was no longer the girl they threw out. She was the woman who had come back, not to beg, not to seek approval, but to witness the ending and carry it without resentment. In the hallway, she heard a soft groan, a familiar cough. She tiptoed into her father's room. He was awake. Barely. She sat beside him and adjusted the blanket. His eyes searched hers. Madelyn leaned close. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to carry it anymore. I'm still here." His eyes closed, and for a moment, his breath calmed. And in that stillness, Madelyn felt something unspoken pass between them. Not absolution. Not even understanding. Just release. Chapter 7. Almost Farewell. The mornings had changed. There was no longer the sound of Samuel shifting in his wheelchair, or the small, strained grunts he made when Madelyn greeted him with tea. Now his breaths were faint and spaced, coming in uneven intervals that made her count silently between them. Sometimes she would pause in the kitchen, unsure whether he had taken another breath at all. Then relief. A slow rise of the chest. A whisper of life still clinging. The hospice nurse called it the twilight stage. "His body is beginning to let go," she told Madelyn gently, kneeling beside the bed. "It's like a tide pulling away. Don't try to fight it. Just be near." Madelyn sat by his bed more often now. Noah usually curled in a blanket on the floor with a book or puzzle. He didn't ask many questions, just occasionally looked up and said things like, "Grandpa's dreaming," or "He's resting, right?" And each time, Madelyn smiled and nodded. "Yes, baby. He's just resting." But the air in the room told a different story. There was no rest here, only waiting. One afternoon, while Noah napped in her lap, Madelyn found herself humming an old hymn, one she hadn't sung since she was a teenager in church choir. She didn't know why it came back. Maybe grief opened strange doors in the heart. Samuel's eyelids fluttered at the sound. It was the first movement he had made all day. She leaned in closer and kept humming. He tried to move his lips. The effort was clear, even if the words didn't come. Madelyn reached for his hand. "I'm not mad anymore," she said softly. "I was. But not now." His fingers twitched around hers. "I think part of me always hoped you'd come back," she added. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. "I didn't come back for you. Not at first. I came back for me. For Noah." She looked toward the window. A gentle breeze had stirred the lace curtains. "But now, maybe I'm here for all of us." Later that evening, Deborah sat beside her on the porch with a small photo album in her lap. "I found this in the attic," she said. "I thought maybe you'd want to look at it with me." Madelyn hesitated, but then she nodded. They opened it together, page by page. Photos from birthdays long forgotten. A 6-year-old Madelyn with cake on her nose. Her father lifting her onto his shoulders at the county fair. A blurry shot of Deborah holding a newborn, eyes red but smiling. Madelyn didn't say much, just let the images wash over her. She reached one page where her teenage self stood awkwardly in a school hallway, one hand protectively over her stomach, barely showing. "I found this in your bedroom drawer after you left," Deborah murmured. Madelyn swallowed hard. "I didn't know what to do with it," her mother added. "So I just kept it, like everything else I didn't say." They sat in silence. Then Madelyn said, quietly but clearly, "He's going to go soon, isn't he?" Deborah nodded, eyes brimming. "Yes." Another pause. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what comes after?" Madelyn looked out toward the street. The trees were beginning to turn orange. Fall was coming. "You'll still have us," she said, placing a hand over her mother's. "You'll still have Noah. And maybe we can make something better out of what's left." That night, she sat beside Samuel's bed and read aloud to him. Not a Bible verse. Not something symbolic or heavy. Just Charlotte's Web, a story Noah had chosen. And when she reached the part where Charlotte whispered, "You have been my friend," that in itself is a tremendous thing. Madelyn's voice cracked. She looked up. Samuel's eyes were open, but there was no movement, no recognition, just stillness. And then one last breath. Madelyn sat still for a long time. She didn't scream. She didn't sob. She just sat with the quiet, with the man who had once rejected her, with the man who had just finally let go. And in that hush, something inside her released too. Chapter 8. The Sound of Silence. The house was full of people, but no one spoke above a whisper. Relatives Madelyn barely remembered arrived with tepid casseroles and overly soft embraces. Neighbors stood in the living room holding cups of instant coffee, exchanging memories with the tone reserved for the freshly departed. "It's such a loss," someone murmured. He was a strong man. A provider. He never talked much about Madelyn, but I'm sure he was proud. Madelyn stood at the edge of the room, holding a cup she hadn't sipped from. Her hands were steady, but her heart felt unmoored, floating somewhere between duty and detachment. She didn't correct them. She didn't nod. She simply listened. Because grief didn't come wrapped in clarity. Sometimes it just came in waves, quiet, strange, and hard to describe. Noah wandered through the crowd with a paper flower he'd made, showing it to anyone who looked sad. Most people smiled and patted his head. Deborah hovered near the window, speaking to no one. The red in her eyes was no longer fresh, but faded, the kind that settled after a long night of crying with no more tears left. Madelyn walked over and stood beside her. "He would have hated all this fuss," she said softly. Deborah let out a soft, broken laugh. "He used to say, 'Just toss me in the river and don't spend a dime on caskets.'" "Well," Madelyn said, "he got a pine box and bad coffee. That's pretty close." They shared a faint smile. The first in days. The funeral was quiet. No hymns. No choir. Just a local pastor reading a few verses and a scattering of people in folding chairs on a windy hill. The cemetery overlooked the river. It was the same place where Madelyn's grandmother had been buried. The air smelled like dried leaves and something metallic. When the pastor invited anyone to speak, no one moved. Madelyn looked around. Her throat was dry. She hadn't prepared anything. She hadn't even planned to stand. But as the silence dragged on, she rose slowly to her feet. She stepped forward. Noah watched her with wide, trusting eyes. "I'm not sure what to say," she began, her voice low but clear. "We had a complicated relationship." There was a shift in the air, a rustle of truth. "My father was a man of few words. He believed in hard work, in rules, in consequences. And sometimes, those beliefs came with a cost." She paused. "But he was also the first person who taught me how to fix a tire, how to stand up straight, how to recognize the sound of a thunderstorm rolling in before you could see the clouds." A gust of wind swept through her hair. And in the end, when words failed him, he still found a way to listen. She looked down at the casket. "I forgive you," she whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. After the burial, most of the guests filed out quickly. A few left awkward condolences. Others didn't meet her eyes at all. Madelyn didn't mind. She wasn't there for them. Later that evening, back at the house, she found Noah sitting on the porch with his drawing pad. He had drawn a stick figure in a box under the ground, with a flower and the word "Goodbye, Grandpa" above it. She sat beside him. "Did Grandpa go to heaven?" he asked. Madelyn looked at the sky, soft with dusk. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think maybe a part of him lives in you now." Noah nodded, as if that made sense. Then he asked, "Are we going home now?" Madelyn didn't answer right away, because she wasn't sure what home meant anymore. That night, she wandered into the kitchen and found her mother wrapping leftovers. You don't have to stay if you don't want to, Deborah said, not looking up. Madelyn leaned against the counter. I know. Deborah hesitated. Then, but I'd like it if you did. The words hung in the air soft, vulnerable. I can't stay forever, Madelyn replied. Tacoma is our life now. Noah's school. My job. The people who gave me a chance. I understand. But, Madelyn added, we can visit. And maybe, you can visit us. Deborah's hands paused mid-wrap. I'd like that. For the first time, the kitchen didn't feel like a stranger's domain. It felt like a place being remade, slowly, gently, without expectation. Madelyn walked out to the living room and sat down, watching her son sleep on the couch, curled up in a blanket. She was tired, but she was not lost. And in that quiet house, the one that had once cast her out, she found something small but unshakable. A space where forgiveness had bloomed, not loudly. Not all at once, but like light through old curtains. Chapter 9. Packing quiet goodbyes. The suitcase sat half-zipped at the foot of the bed, a soft sign that something was ending. Madelyn folded clothes with quiet care. Noah's jeans. His favorite hoodie with the dinosaur patch. A hand-knitted blanket Deborah had tucked into the corner of the guest closet the night before, saying simply, for when the nights get cold in Tacoma. She wasn't sure what to make of that small gesture, but she packed it anyway. Outside, the wind rustled the oak trees in the yard, the same trees Madelyn used to climb as a child before things became too complicated to stay young. The funeral had come and gone, and with it, the flood of visitors. The house had quieted again, but this time it didn't feel like exile. It felt like an in-between. A place with echoes instead of accusations. Deborah hovered in the doorway, arms folded over her sweater. You don't have to rush, she said. Madelyn looked up. I'm not, but I think I'm ready. Her mother nodded slowly. I could drive you to the station. We'll take a cab. Madelyn replied gently. It's easier. A pause, the kind where words wait behind pride, pushing softly. Deborah stepped forward. Would you mind if I came to visit next month? Madelyn blinked. She hadn't expected that. Of course not, she said. I think Noah would like that. Deborah let out a breath, small, hopeful. Then I'll start looking at bus tickets. That afternoon, Madelyn took Noah to the backyard for one last walk along the old fence line. He held her hand tightly as they passed the garden beds where her father once planted tomatoes in perfect rows. Is Grandma sad? He asked. I think so, Madelyn replied. Are you? She thought about it. I'm not sad we came. I'm not sad we helped. I think I'm just ready to go home. Noah tilted his head. This isn't home? Madelyn smiled faintly. It used to be, but people change. And places do too. He seemed to accept that in the way only children could, without debate, without demand. They left early the next morning. There were no long hugs, no promises made with tears, just a quiet farewell on the porch. Deborah stood in her robe, holding Noah's drawing in one hand, the same one he'd made for his grandfather. She didn't cry, but her eyes were wet with something deeper than grief. Call me when you get there, she said. Madelyn nodded. I will. They didn't say I love you. But there was something in the way Deborah touched her shoulder, just briefly, that said all the words that had been too hard for too long. The bus ride back was long but easier than the one that brought her there. Tacoma greeted her with drizzle and fog. The sidewalks she knew. The cafe on the corner still open late. The woman at the shelter's front desk remembered her name. Welcome back, she said with a kind smile. Madelyn didn't realize how much she needed to hear those words until they settled into her chest like warm soup. Back in her apartment, she unpacked slowly. Noah sat on the floor, building a tower with Legos while humming to himself. The space smelled like home, cheap soap, cereal, worn fabric softener. She hung the crocheted blanket over the back of the couch. Not because she missed her mother, but because healing isn't always about erasing what hurt. Sometimes, it's just about letting the light touch it in a new way. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her and asked, "Are we happy now?" Madelyn kissed his forehead and whispered, "I think we're getting there." Chapter 10. After the ending. Something begins. The air in Tacoma smelled different now. Not just because of the season turning, the crispness of early fall. The scent of wet concrete after the rain, but because Madelyn herself had changed. Grief didn't leave scars you could see, but it shifted the weight of a body. The way she stood. The way she walked to work with her shoulders just a little straighter. The way she said good morning like she meant it. It had been 2 weeks since they returned. Long enough to fall back into the rhythm of life, but not long enough to forget. And she didn't want to forget. She was back at the Maple Bean Cafe, wiping down counters and humming to herself while the morning crowd trickled in. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. A job earned, a life sustained, a rhythm chosen. The manager, Liz, leaned out from behind the espresso machine and smiled. "Something's different about you," she said. "Did you get a haircut?" Madelyn laughed. "Nope. Just came back from Missouri." Liz raised a brow. "Family?" Madelyn hesitated for a second. "Yes," she said at last. "And closure." Liz didn't pry. Just nodded like someone who understood more than she let on. That evening, as golden light spilled across their small apartment, Madelyn sat with Noah on the floor, coloring. He had started drawing family portraits again, only this time, they weren't stick figures. They had detail. Smiles. Shoes. Even hair. "This is you," he said, pointing at a woman with long brown scribbles and a blue dress. "And this is me. And this," he added, a gray-haired woman with glasses, "is Grandma. She can visit us now, right?" Madelyn nodded. "Yes, she can." "And what about Grandpa?" She paused. "Grandpa lives in the stories we tell now. And maybe in the parts of us we're still discovering." Noah blinked thoughtfully, then added a small star above Grandpa's head. Later, after Noah had fallen asleep, Madelyn sat at the window with a cup of tea and opened her journal, something she hadn't done in months. She wrote without stopping. "There are people I will never fully understand, and wounds I may never completely name. But there is peace in the acceptance of both. There is peace in the choosing to stay, to walk away, to return, to forgive. This life I'm building now, it's mine. Not perfect, but real. And I'm proud of it." She closed the notebook and looked out at the street below. The world was still moving, buses, dogs barking in the distance, someone laughing on a balcony across the alley. And so was she. Not just surviving now, but becoming. At 11:17 p.m. her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hi, Madelyn. This is Grace. I work with your mother at the community center. She talks about you and Noah all the time. You're welcome to visit any time. Just wanted to say, you're loved." Even when it wasn't said right. Madelyn read the message twice, then once more. She didn't reply right away. She just sat in the dark, the phone glowing in her hand, and let the warmth come slowly. Like healing, like home. Chapter 11. The Shape of Normal. 3 weeks had passed since the funeral, and the days had settled into a rhythm that was neither exciting nor dull, just steady. Madelyn found peace in it. Morning shifts at the cafe. Afternoons at the park with Noah. Evenings filled with homework, reheated leftovers, and the gentle buzz of the kettle whistling while she folded laundry. Her life was no longer defined by crisis. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Yet beneath that calm rhythm, something was stirring. She didn't recognize it at first. But slowly, she began to notice. She was breathing deeper, laughing more freely, thinking beyond next week's grocery list. And one quiet Thursday evening, she opened her laptop and Googled something she hadn't dared to in years. Community college night classes, early childhood education, Tacoma. The next morning at the cafe, Madelyn tucked the printed schedule into her apron pocket like a secret. Planning a second job? Liz teased as she caught her glancing at the paper. Madelyn smiled. Something like that. Liz leaned in. You know, I've seen you with kids. You have a way with them. Madelyn looked up, surprised. You think so? Liz nodded. It's not just babysitting. You actually see them. That's rare. Madelyn folded the paper carefully and placed it back into her pocket. Maybe it's time I start seeing myself too. That weekend, she and Noah visited the local library. It had a reading circle, bean bags, and volunteers who handed out apple slices and crayons. Noah loved it. While he played, Madelyn sat by the window with a book she didn't intend to finish. Her eyes kept drifting. Across the room, another parent caught her gaze, a man about her age. Tall and soft-spoken, helping a little girl trace letters with a finger. His daughter, probably. He smiled at her in that polite, familiar way that said we're both trying our best not to fall apart today. She returned the smile. Just a small flicker, but it stayed with her the rest of the afternoon. That night, Madelyn journaled again. Something she had begun doing more often since the trip back from Springfield. I'm not ready for more. Not yet. But I'm not afraid of it anymore. And maybe that's something. She looked over at Noah, asleep with his legs tangled in the blanket, his toy bear tucked under one arm. So much of her life had been wrapped around keeping him safe. But now it felt like the walls she had built for protection were becoming doors instead. On Monday, she submitted an application for a night class, Foundations of Child Development. It would meet twice a week for 3 months. The cost made her stomach twist, but she applied for a scholarship and hit submit before she could talk herself out of it. 2 days later, Deborah called. This time not with grief, but with something lighter. Would Noah like a care package? She asked. I saw these storybooks on sale. Thought maybe he'd enjoy them. Madelyn paused. That's kind, she said. Thank you. I'm not trying to make up for everything, Deborah said quickly, nervous. I just want to be part of your life now if that's allowed. Madelyn smiled softly. Unseen on the other end of the line. It's allowed. That evening, she received a confirmation email. You've been accepted into the fall evening course, Foundations of Child Development. Madelyn stared at the screen for a long moment. And then she cried. Not the kind of tears that came from pain, but the kind that came from remembering she could choose. She could grow. She could dream again, not because she had to escape, but because she finally had space to become. She walked into Noah's room, kissed his forehead, and whispered, We're going to be okay. We're more than okay. Chapter 12, A Seat at the Table. The classroom smelled like coffee and dry erase markers. Madelyn clutched her worn notebook to her chest, eyes scanning the room for a seat near the back, not too close to the front where the eager students sat, but not hidden enough to look like she didn't belong. It had been years since she'd stepped into a classroom. Years since she'd filled a blank page for something other than budgeting or grocery lists. She found a chair near the window and sat slowly, heart pounding. The room was filled with a mix of people, some younger, fresh out of high school, still wearing earbuds and hoodies. Others older, maybe returning mothers like her. Or people changing careers after decades of something else. Everyone had a laptop. She had a pen. She tried not to let it matter. The professor, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Laurel Mendel, walked in with a quiet confidence. Her voice was calm, welcoming, the kind that didn't rush. Child development, she began, is not just about understanding children. It's about remembering we were all one once. A few heads nodded. Madelyn felt herself exhale for the first time in minutes. Dr. Mendel passed around a handout titled, Who Were You at Age 5? We'll start here, she said. Tonight, we go backward before we go forward. Madelyn stared at the page. A simple prompt sat at the top. Describe yourself as a child. What did you love? What did you fear? She hesitated. The pen trembled slightly between her fingers. Then, slowly, she began to write. I love trees and dirt, and staying up late with books under the blanket. I feared not being good enough. I feared being left behind. I was quiet, but curious. I used to pretend I was a teacher, using chalk on the garage wall. Sometimes, I just wanted someone to see me. She didn't stop writing until the page was nearly full. After class, Dr. Mendel approached her as she slipped on her coat. I noticed your handwriting, she said. It looked purposeful. Madelyn smiled, shy. I haven't used a computer in years. Dr. Mendel shrugged. Pen and paper are underrated. She glanced at Madelyn's name tag. You're Madelyn? Yes. I hope you'll speak up in class. There's strength in your quiet. Madelyn blinked, caught off guard. I'm just here to learn. You will, Dr. Mendel said. But don't forget, you're allowed to take up space too. That night, she returned home past 9. The apartment was dim. Rosa had babysat Noah and left a note on the counter. He finished his homework, brushed teeth, and asked me to tell you he's proud you're going to school. Madelyn smiled, blinking hard. She tiptoed into Noah's room and kissed his temple. You'll always be my reason, she whispered. But tonight, I think I did something for me. Later, she sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, and opened her notebook again. She reread what she had written. Those simple lines felt like a bridge between who she was and who she was becoming. Between the 5-year-old who wanted to be seen and the 27-year-old finally allowing herself to step into the light. She didn't know where this course would lead. Maybe a degree. Maybe a job at a preschool. Maybe something entirely different. But for the first time, it wasn't about survival. It was about direction. And she was the one choosing it. Chapter 13. The Fork in the Routine. The cafe buzzed with its usual morning rhythm, clinking mugs, soft jazz in the background, the low hum of espresso machines working overtime. Madelyn moved through the motions with practiced grace, wipe table, refill creamers, smile at regulars. But today, something in her felt out of sync. Maybe it was the class. Or the fact that she hadn't stopped thinking about what Dr. Mendel had said, you're allowed to take up space. She hadn't felt that before. Taking space meant being seen. And for too long, she had built a life in the margins, safe, predictable, invisible. That changed today. It started mid-shift when Liz, the manager, called her into the back office. Don't worry, Liz said quickly. Nothing's wrong. Madelyn smiled nervously. Okay. Liz folded her arms. Look, you've been with us for over a year now. Always on time. Reliable. Customers love you. I've been thinking. We're going to need a new assistant floor lead. Madelyn blinked. I'm not asking for an answer right this second, Liz continued. Just think about it. It's a small pay bump, more hours, and some scheduling responsibilities. A raise. More stability, but also more time away from Noah. And her class. She nodded slowly. Can I take a day or two? Absolutely. But don't take too long. I need someone I can count on. Madelyn stepped out of the office with the corners of her world spinning just slightly. This should have been good news. And part of her was proud. But another part, the part that was just beginning to grow, whispered, What about your class? That night, she sat across from Noah at dinner, grilled cheese and canned tomato soup. He told her about a new kid in class who brought sardines for lunch and became instantly unpopular. I traded him my gummy bears, Noah said with pride. I think that makes me brave. Madelyn laughed, brushing a crumb from his cheek. It does. Then, his tone shifted. Mom, what do you want to be when you grow up? She paused, caught off guard. I mean, aren't I already grown up? She teased. He tilted his head. No, like, what do you want to be? Madelyn stared at her soup for a long moment. I think I want to be someone who helps kids, she said softly. Maybe a teacher. Or someone who makes things better. Noah grinned. Like you already do for me? Her eyes stung. Yeah, baby, she whispered. Exactly like that. Later that night, she opened her laptop and reread the course syllabus. She had already missed the sign-up for the next class in the sequence. But if she stayed the course, she could re-enroll in spring. Unless she took the assistant lead job. Then night classes would be impossible. Security or growth. It wasn't the first time she had to choose. But this time, it wasn't about survival. It was about who she was becoming. The next morning, she brought Liz a cup of coffee before her shift. I appreciate the offer, Madelyn said. But I think I have to say no. Liz looked surprised. Madelyn continued, voice steady. I've started taking night classes. And I can't do both well. I want to grow, even if it means I stay here part-time longer. Liz was quiet for a beat. Then she smiled. You've got guts, she said. And you know what? We'll make it work. I believe in your direction. Madelyn exhaled. The pressure in her chest lifted. This wasn't a loss. This was a decision. Her decision. That evening, she picked up Noah from Rosa's apartment. He bounded into her arms like he always did. As they walked home, hand in hand, he asked, Are we still gonna be okay? Madelyn squeezed his fingers. Better than okay, she said. We're choosing our future now. Chapter 14. The Unfamiliar Familiar. The library smelled like paper and sunlight that afternoon, the way it always did when the weather cooled, but the windows stayed open just a little too long. Madelyn had promised Noah he could borrow 3 books this time instead of 2. He held up a story about space, one about a talking cat and another about feelings. Madelyn raised an eyebrow. Feelings? Noah shrugged. It has monsters, but they're the sad kind. She laughed. Sounds like something I'd read. They headed toward the beanbags where the children's corner curved near the big window. And that's when she saw him again. The tall man with soft eyes and a calm presence, the one she'd noticed during the story circle weeks ago. He was sitting on the floor, a little girl leaning against his shoulder while she pointed to animals in a picture book. He looked up. Their eyes met. He smiled first. Hey, he said, gently. We meet again. Madelyn smiled back. Seems like it. He patted the carpet beside him. You guys want to join? We're figuring out if giraffes eat pancakes. Noah giggled and dropped to the floor without hesitation. Madelyn followed. More cautiously. I'm Madelyn, she offered. Eli, he said, extending a hand. And this is Ivy. She's 4. Going on philosopher. Ivy gave a shy wave, then turned back to her book. Noah and Ivy quickly became absorbed in a new task, sorting plastic animal figurines by how friendly they looked. Madelyn and Eli sat back, a bit to the side. There was no awkwardness, no urgency, just space. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to explain herself. They talked about books first, then parenting, then food. Eli mentioned he worked part-time as a graphic designer from home so he could raise Ivy on his own. It wasn't the plan, he said, but plans are overrated, I've learned. Madelyn nodded. Yeah, life happens in the unplanned parts. He looked at her for a second longer than politeness required. You sound like someone who knows that well. She didn't dodge it. I do. After an hour, they stood and helped their kids pack up their books and toys. Eli held Ivy's coat while she spun in circles, giggling. Noah tagged along, mimicking her until they both nearly fell over from dizziness. You come here often? Eli asked as they headed for the door. Madelyn smirked. You really just asked me that, didn't you? He laughed. I did, but I meant it. Ivy loves it here, and it's nice to see another single parent who isn't barely holding it together with string and caffeine. She tilted her head. Oh, I still use caffeine. But now there's purpose, too. They stood outside as the kids chased each other around a bench. Eli shoved his hands into his pockets. Would you want to meet up again sometime? Maybe a play date. Or coffee. Or both. Madelyn hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she hadn't let herself consider anything like this in a long time. Then she thought of what she'd told Noah just days earlier. "We're choosing our future now." She smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he asked, "Was Ivy nice?" "She was," Madelyn replied. "And her dad was nice too." Noah yawned. "Are we gonna see them again?" Madelyn brushed a hand through his hair. "Maybe, if we're lucky. Later." She sat by the window with her journal, pen hovering over the page. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's not a grand return. It's a quiet moment in a library when you realize you've made room for something new. Not to replace the old, but to grow alongside it. She didn't write anything else that night. She just let the silence fill in the blanks. And this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt open. Chapter 15. Between the Lines. The coffee shop on 6th Avenue was quiet on Sunday mornings. The kind of place with low lighting, mismatched mugs, and handwritten chalkboard menus that offered drinks like honey rain latte and lavender fog. Madelyn had passed it dozens of times, but never walked in, not until today. She arrived 5 minutes early. Noah clung to her hand, his other one holding a plastic dinosaur. Eli and Ivy were already there, seated near the window. A table scattered with coloring sheets and a shared chocolate croissant. Ivy jumped up when she saw Noah. "We saved the giraffe chair for you." Madelyn and Eli exchanged a smile. It was unspoken, but warm. The kids played at a low table beside them while Madelyn and Eli sipped coffee and settled into something that felt easy. "You ever get that feeling," Eli said, stirring his cup, "that your life is finally catching up with who you actually are?" Madelyn tilted her head. "Like the outside is starting to look like the inside?" "Exactly," he nodded. "I used to feel like I was wearing someone else's shoes. Too big. Too loud. Now it's just me, finally walking barefoot." She laughed. "I like that. Mine wasn't shoes, though. Mine was armor. All sharp edges. And now?" She looked down at her cup, thinking, "Now I'm learning that I don't need it. At least, not all the time." He didn't rush to fill the pause. He just waited, the kind of listening that came from someone who had lived in silence before. Madelyn found herself telling him things she hadn't told many people. About being thrown out. About surviving Tacoma. About Samuel's death, not the details, but the emotional outlines. The shape of the ache. Eli didn't flinch. "My wife passed 3 years ago," he said quietly, watching Ivy gently braid Noah's hair with a plastic clip. "Breast cancer. Stage 4 before we even saw it coming." Madelyn's heart ached. "I'm sorry." He gave a soft shrug. "Grief changes shape. But it doesn't leave. It just gets quieter." They sat for a while without speaking. Outside, the wind teased the trees. Inside, their children laughed like they were already old friends. Later, when the kids were drawing dragons with whipped cream on the windows, Eli looked over at her. "I don't know where this is going," he said, voice gentle. "And I'm not in a rush. But I like being around you." Madelyn's first instinct was to deflect, to laugh or look away or change the subject. But instead, she took a breath. "I like being around you too." And she meant it. They walked home together, 4 of them. A mismatched little group with no name and no plan. But when Ivy slipped her hand into Madelyn's and Noah offered Eli half of his sticker sheet, it didn't feel like something new. It felt like something possible. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep beside his stack of library books, Madelyn stood by the window with her journal in her hands, but didn't write. She just watched the city breathe, watched the porch light flicker in the apartment across the alley, watched her reflection in the glass, not as a girl who was cast out, but as a woman who had stayed. Stayed for herself, for her son, for something that might just be starting. And that was enough. Chapter 16. Balancing Acts. The morning light spilled softly into Madelyn's apartment, dust motes dancing lazily in the air. Noah was already awake, sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table, diligently coloring inside the lines of his latest drawing, a family holding hands under a shining sun. Madelyn leaned against the counter, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The day stretched ahead, full of meetings with professors, errands, and bedtime stories. Somehow, amidst the routine, she felt a quiet confidence taking root. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was balancing. Her night class schedule meant late evenings, often returning home after Noah was asleep. But Eli had offered to help with babysitting, his gentle presence a growing comfort rather than a complication. Yesterday, they had shared a quiet dinner, just the two of them, after Noah was tucked in, talking about everything and nothing. Madelyn found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years, the sound light and easy. She was still cautious, still wary of the cracks that grief had left. But she was beginning to understand that belonging wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, again and again. The cafe buzzed that afternoon as Madelyn wiped down tables between customers. She thought about the essay she had to write on child psychology, the scholarship application due next week, and the parent-teacher conference for Noah. It felt like juggling flaming torches, exhausting but necessary. Her phone buzzed. A message from Eli. "Can I pick Noah up from school tomorrow? I want to surprise him with his favorite ice cream." She smiled, typing back quickly. "That would be amazing. Thank you." That evening, as she tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think Grandpa would like ice cream too?" Madelyn kissed his forehead. "I think he would. And he'd want you to have plenty." Noah giggled and pulled the blanket over his head. Later, Madelyn sat by the window, the city lights flickering outside. She opened her journal and wrote, "I'm learning that belonging isn't a place, it's a feeling. It's messy and imperfect and sometimes scary. But it's worth choosing every day. For me, for Noah, for the family we are still creating." She closed the book, feeling the weight of those words settle gently in her chest. And, for the first time in a long time, she believed in tomorrow. Chapter 17, Finding Strength in the Struggle. The weeks blurred into a whirlwind of lectures, late-night study sessions, and early morning shifts at the cafe. Madelyn often found herself running on fumes, her body aching but her mind sharp, fueled by a determination that refused to waver. Noah's laughter was her refuge, the reason she kept moving forward even when exhaustion threatened to pull her under. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she collapsed on the couch. Textbooks sprawled across the coffee table. Her phone buzzed, a message from Eli. "Need a break? Coffee tomorrow." She smiled, typing back, "Definitely." The next day, Eli picked Noah up from school as promised, surprising him with his favorite chocolate ice cream. Madelyn watched from the doorway, grateful for the small moments of support that made her heavy load feel lighter. At the cafe, Liz noticed the fatigue etched into Madelyn's eyes. "Remember to breathe," she said kindly. "You're doing more than most." Madelyn nodded, appreciating the encouragement. Back at school, Madelyn found herself participating more in class discussions, her confidence growing. Dr. Mendel praised her insightful reflections, noting the depth of her understanding and empathy. Yet, balancing all her roles was not without struggle. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when doubts whispered that she was not enough. But with each challenge, she learned to ask for help, from Eli, from Rosa, from the quiet strength within herself. One rainy evening, as she walked home with Noah under a shared umbrella, Madelyn felt a flicker of hope. The path ahead was uncertain. But she no longer feared it. She was no longer just surviving. She was building. Chapter 18, The Quiet Opening. The late afternoon sun filtered softly through the curtains of Eli's small apartment as Madelyn stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the park. Ivy bounded to the door, her laughter echoing warmly against the walls. Noah followed close behind, clutching his new dinosaur toy, his face alight with excitement. Eli greeted them with a genuine smile, the kind that made Madelyn's chest feel lighter than it had in months. "Welcome to our humble kingdom," he said, gesturing toward the cozy living room scattered with children's books and mismatched cushions. As the children played, Madelyn and Eli settled into the worn sofa, the atmosphere easy and unforced. They talked about everything and nothing, favorite books, parenting challenges, hopes for the future. At one point, Eli reached out, brushing a stray hair from Madelyn's face. "I know we're both carrying scars," he said softly, "but I'm glad we're here, finding new chapters together." Madelyn met his gaze, feeling a warmth that was both comforting and unfamiliar. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, "but I want to try." Over the following weeks, their meetings became a gentle rhythm, dinners shared, laughter exchanged, moments of quiet understanding. Madelyn found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, discovering that vulnerability could be a strength rather than a weakness. And with each step forward, the past felt less like a chain and more like a foundation, imperfect, but strong enough to build upon. One evening, as they watched the children chase fireflies in the backyard, Madelyn realized that belonging wasn't about perfection. It was about the courage to keep showing up. For herself, for her son, for the family they were beginning to create. Chapter 19: Storms and Shelter. It started with a phone call. A sudden cancellation of Noah's daycare due to staff illness, leaving Madelyn scrambling to rearrange her already packed schedule. The stress weighed heavy on her chest, threatening to undo the fragile balance she had fought so hard to create. Work shifts overlapped with class deadlines, and nights grew shorter. Eli noticed the strain, offering to help with Noah whenever he could. Yet, Madelyn hesitated, pride and fear wrestling within her. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting day, she broke down quietly in the kitchen. Eli found her there, shoulders shaking but eyes defiant. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly, wrapping her in a steady embrace. That moment marked a turning point. Madelyn realized that accepting help wasn't weakness, but strength, a lesson hard-earned through years of carrying burdens by herself. With Eli and Rosa's support, she began to navigate the storm with newfound resilience. And though the challenges didn't disappear, neither did her resolve. Chapter 20: A New Dawn. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm light over the breakfast table where Noah laughed, his eyes bright with joy. Madelyn watched him, feeling a deep sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Beside her, Eli poured coffee, the quiet rhythm of their shared routine grounding her in the present. It had been a long journey, from the stormy night she was cast out, to the days of solitary struggle, to the fragile steps toward forgiveness and love. Now, standing on the threshold of a new chapter, Madelyn knew that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about embracing every part of it, letting the pain and joy weave together into the story of who she was and who she was becoming. She reached across the table, taking Eli's hand in hers. "We're building something real," she said softly. "Not perfect, but ours." He smiled, eyes warm and steady. "For all of us," he replied. And as Noah's laughter echoed around them, Madelyn felt the weight of old wounds lift, replaced by a hope that was strong enough to carry them all forward.